Hey guys, this is Graham. I am an author, illustrator, and truck driver in Oklahoma City. I am trying to get out of the truck full time and into the writing desk full time. You can help me do that by checking out my books on Amazon and watching this channel. Now on to the video. Alright, Frick, eventually I'm going to get this video right. Today's subject is alternate history. I recently rewatched The Patriot, a movie with Mel Gibson, and it got me thinking about that, along with Gladiator with Russell Crowe, and the Leviathan series of young adult novels by Scott Westerfeld. Obviously, I just did that big recap video for Temeraire. And even today, I finished reading a comic book, issue 7, of REDCOAT came out from Ghost Machine. I'll do a separate video about that. It was just fantastic. And it just got me thinking about the alternate history genre. It used to bug me when alternate history writers played with history too much instead of just giving us a cool setting and then following the same events, until I realized that that was stupid. You can either tell a really cool, unique story with some made-up characters in an actual setting, and yeah, the ending of your story might be completely contrary to what actually happened in history, or you can write what actually happened and just put like goblins and fairies in it or whatever, and then at that point it's like, okay, maybe you're trying to teach history through fiction, but you can really ramp up the drama and the heart and the emotion if you're just telling a story and setting it in an actual setting. So the reason why I mentioned this with The Patriot is that Mel Gibson's character, Benjamin Martin, was not an actual figure in the war. He was kind of an amalgamation of other actual people, but he was a representative man of his time. This was a man who was a widower, he was a farmer, he was a militia member, he had fought in previous skirmishes, he had a past. The various attributes of him could have described the everyman of his time period. And so while he wasn't a real figure, he was demonstrative of the esprit de temps, like the spirit of the time. That movie came out when I was in high school, and I remember reading a negative review about it in the newspaper, because this was back when I read the newspaper, and critics were all just about dumping on things that most people liked. Like, seriously, there was this, it's like Rotten Tomatoes now, there's this inversion between the critics score and the audience score. If the critics love it, audiences usually are going to think that it's crap, and the reverse is true. And in this case, like, the critic was poo-pooing it, and audiences loved that movie. But one critic said specifically, like, this is a dumb movie because it distills the entire American Revolution down to the experience and the quest for vengeance of one man. It's like, well, that is certainly a reading of it, but it's definitely a misreading of it, because it gives a personal story to that man while he goes through the larger movements of the end of the Revolutionary War. Everybody who was in that war had a personal reason for being there. They all had their own personal arcs. They were all the main character in their own story. Benjamin Martin was just a named character played by a recognizable actor who brought an incredible amount of heart to that role. A man who had lost his wife, he'd lost 2 sons to the same redcoat, and had to navigate all of the emotional weight of his past. He had done some things that he wasn't proud of in previous wars, and he always felt that his sins would come back to him, and he felt that the loss of his sons, the ends of their lives, were his fault. It was God punishing him for what he'd done before. Like, it wasn't meant to say that this is what the entire American Revolution was about, was this unique experience of this fictional character, but it was rather like the audience being walked through what a normal man might have experienced during this time and in this setting. There were historical figures in there, Nathaniel Greene, there was mention of Dan Morgan, Cornwallis, there were others, and the rest of it was just a way to really immerse you in the period and in the event. Gladiator contrasts really nicely with this, because while there were actual historical figures in there like Marcus Aurelius and Commodus, the character of Maximus was created out of whole cloth. And significantly, the ending of the original movie, where Maximus kills Commodus in the arena, obviously didn't happen. Commodus did succeed Marcus Aurelius, and then he reigned for, I believe, about 12 years. He wasn't a moral man, but this was just an examination of kind of the period, kind of the era, but it wasn't so much about the event. It wasn't about the actual rule of Commodus. It was a commentary of Commodus and his character, but more to the point, like, it was a story of, like, what if this man was right rightfully like set to rule Rome, but he had been laid low by a scheme, and then he ended up in the arena. Like, the movie is called Gladiator. It is about a gladiator. What would a gladiator go through? This. Okay, how do we ramp up the drama? This gladiator was actually supposed to be emperor. Who wanted him dead? The guy who became emperor. Did this actually happen this way? No. Is it representative of things that could have happened and that were period accurate? Yeah, I'm sure Metatron would probably tear this movie apart based on like, here's all the anachronisms and here's this, that, and the other thing. But it's meant to show you the kind of person that would have to live in this setting. And they just so happen to put it against the backdrop of the downfall of Rome or the end of the Roman times, the Caesarian era. I've still got to do a whole lot of studying and reading on Rome. But yeah, Marcus Aurelius, Commodus, real people, Maximus, not. Still a freaking awesome movie with an awesome soundtrack, great music by Enya. Just a beautiful way to kind of put this setting on screen, show us characters who were of the time and who could have been of the time, and just tell a beautiful story with great characters in it. That's the same ethos that Scott Westerfeld had when he wrote the Leviathan trilogy, which is set against the backdrop of World War I, but in a steampunk world. You've got the Allies, and you've got the, what do they call them, Darwinists and clankers. The Allies use genetically engineered life forms. They got airships that are actually like whales that breathe hydrogen. And then you got the clankers that use like heavy iron and steel things. And it starts out like literally on the day that Franz Ferdinand was murdered by Gavrilo Princeps. Princeps or Princep? Anyway, Westerfeld took a really good approach to that series by writing epilogues or afterwards that talked about the actual historical events and then highlighted what he changed in them. For example, Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophia, they had 4 children in real life. In this book, they just had one, and his name was Alexander. So creating a fictional child gave him some leeway, but tying him to those actual events allowed him to weave this fictional story through things that really happened and really ramp up the drama. The whole story was his whole story necessarily was about whether they could get the Pope to declare him a legitimate heir of the throne of Austria-Hungary, which in real life the Pope refused to do because his wife wasn't of that ruling class, I guess. But for the sake of drama and tension and a great story, just set against a real event, they wrote it that way, among other things. That's a fantastic trilogy that has held up really well. I'm due to read it again. The artwork by Keith Thompson is just sublime. But that's a really good example of historical fiction / historical fantasy that bases itself in real events, but also is benefited by the afterwards that explain what he changed and why. There's also some editorialization. He opines on things. He's like, this was good, this was bad. He's got some opinions on Churchill that I don't agree with, as many people do. But again, he lays it out there. He does it well, and the writing and the reveals and the twists and the planted seeds that blossom later in the trilogy are extremely well done. And I'm a little bit bummed that this series didn't do better and isn't better remembered, because of the works of his that I've read, like, this is some of his best stuff. Like, he's known for being the guy who published Uglies in 2005, and I was like, Leviathan is probably his obra maestra, and that one deserves a lot more attention. So these are different examples of historical fiction and the way to approach it. And I think it's just, if you want to really tell a good story and you want to set it in an actual time period, but you don't want to be so restrained by what actually happened because it messes up the story that you're trying to tell, you're just using the time period as a setting, and that's fine. If you're using the time period as a setting, but then your story is dog crap and nobody likes your characters, then it's like, well, why don't I just read a nonfiction about what actually happened, because it was probably better than this. Versus if you want to tell a great story and it would work really well in this setting, and you're just going in a different direction, fine. Completely fine. I think this is where I'm going to put kind of the onus on the audience, actually, for just having a greater appreciation for what historical fiction is and what it isn't, and understand that one of the greatest purposes that it can serve is to steer people into having an interest in the actual history itself. If you were to watch The Patriot and then say, okay, I want to read about the Revolutionary War, I want to read about Nathaniel Greene and Lafayette and George Washington and the different battles and what the militia was versus the enlisted and this, that, and the other thing. Like, that would be of great benefit. And then once you understand all the fixed facts and the real history, then you can go back and watch a movie like that with even greater appreciation. Same thing with Gladiator. I watched that movie again probably 8 years ago, and I thought, I really liked the conversations at the beginning between Maximus and Marcus Aurelius. And that got me into starting to read Stoicism and the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. And I was like, I like what he's saying here. This man's got some really profound and applicable thoughts that could work for a lot of people and benefit us as a society. Leviathan, like, that got me interested in the finer workings of World War I and understanding a lot of the key elements of how it kicked off. He also focused on arenas of that war that we don't study as profoundly in the Western world. The first book takes place in Britain and Austria. The second one largely takes place in Turkey, and Turkey had its own revolutions and stuff kicking off at the time, the Ottoman Empire. And then the third one is really a globetrotting adventure that starts in Siberia and crosses the Pacific and goes up into Mexico and ends up in freaking New York City. And actual figures like Nikola Tesla and William Randolph Hearst and Pulitzer, like, all these guys pop up. There are real figures mixing in with the historical characters. There's real ongoing historical drama alongside the fictional drama that he's putting into the narrative, and he does it with such a great word economy that the pacing doesn't suffer for it at all. So if you're well versed in history and you're a writer, you could do a lot worse than to set something in a time period that you know a lot about. And that's why this version of the Thanksgiving story that I'm writing is doing a lot better than it did when I first wrote it in 2020, because I've read a lot more about that time period since then. And I think I can do a much better job of it, not just based on what I know about the fixed facts, but what I also have developed as far as my ethos on historical fiction itself. So I'm going to keep working on that. Let's see, writing accountability. I did some writing last night. I finished the first chapter on a different book. And as far as like the quality of a first chapter goes, I'm pleased with what I have for now. But I'm excited that I'm back writing regularly and I'm checking in with you guys. So let me know if there are any other historical fictions that I could benefit from that kind of follow this model, that they start off with the actual facts, but when they deviate, they do so in service of telling a much greater and a much more engaging story. Hey, thank you for watching that. Did you know that I'm also an author? You can check the description for a link to my book, Mr. Friday. It's set in a future where Black Friday is militarized and televised, and the best Friday fighters end up getting sponsors and backing, but it just so happens that the very best of them actually wants to take the holiday down. When he's approached by a couple of other like-minded fighters, he jumps at the chance, and it goes haywire from there. This is a short novella, and it's available in ebook format for just 99 cents. Drive safe. See you out there.